who was so committed to what he was called to do, who did his work and did it well and did it at a level of excellence that the world will always have to take notice, always giving all of himself, like Jackie Wilson, like Coltrane, like Aretha, like Fred Astaire, like those who inspired him, most importantly, willing to give everything of mind, body, heart, and soul at a level of not even just excellence, but of the sublime. That's Michael Jackson, and he's a part of me forever.
Dr. Dodson, I don't disagree with Dr. West in his assessment that the media has done a relatively decent job at trying again to put Michael Jackson's life and legacy in its proper place. And yet, as is always the case, there are those on national television who shall go nameless in this conversation who have been too quick to jump to the controversy, too quick to jump to the troubles and the travails that he had. And there are those who believe that Michael's humanity has not been allowed to come through in the way that it should. After Ronald Reagan died, there almost seemed to be immediately a moratorium on talking about his policies out of respect for the contribution that he did make and having been president. These persons off the mark, on the mark, when they express these consternations I've seen on the internet about his humanity not being able to come through fully because of people going into attack mode on certain parts of his life.
Well, it's a sign of the hopefulness of black people and the democratic possibilities of America that we're even outraged or surprised that the same white supremacist impulse and media that is incapable of acknowledging the fundamental humanity of black people would, at this moment, acknowledge the central contribution of a person of African descent to the global expression of American culture. So on the one hand, we can't even expect him to do it because Michael Jackson's very existence was in direct contradiction to the very forces that attempted to oppress and suppress the very people that he came from and for which his voice was a monumental proxy. I think that, Tavis, the reality is that to rush to judgment against Michael Jackson, to talk about some of the negative complicating factors of his evolution as a human being and certainly as an artist, is nullified by the overwhelming support that not only African American people but people around the globe have shown in the aftermath and in the wake of this monumental grief. Michael Jackson fundamentally altered the terms of the debate about African American music. Remember, he was a chocolate, cherubic-faced genius with an African American halo. He had an Afro halo. He was a kid who was capable of embodying all of the high possibilities and the deep griefs that besieged the African-American psyche. So when we saw him, look, signed in 1968, the same year King died, issues the first album from the Jackson 5 in 1969, he helped usher into place the post-civil rights sole expression of African-American identity. They didn't go to rallies. They didn't speak on television as political figures. But what they did was change the terms of debate for African-American people. So for America to miss that is to miss the fact that Michael Jackson argued against the very, if you will, deep and profound bowels of white supremacy in the belly of American political culture, and he spoke against it not by being explicitly political, but by commandeering that work ethic and that genius for which he was legendary, and then putting in the face of America the possibility that your highest expression would come about through the voice and the vocal cords of this young person. Michael Jackson carried urban America and eventually American society on his vocal cords for a good 25 to 30 years before even hip-hop became the vox populi of America. And then, as an adult, he shattered racial barriers. Think about it. In 1980, he had a conversation with a publicist from Rolling Stone magazine about putting him on the cover. The publicist declined. Michael Jackson said, "I've heard that black people and black faces don't sell magazines, but one day you're going to beg me to be on there." He was right. 1983, Walter Yetnikoff, the president of CBS Records, where Michael was then placed, couldn't even get his videos played on MTV. He says, "I'm going to blow your spot up and tell the truth about your white supremacist apartheid-like behavior if you don't feature Michael Jackson." Michael Jackson goes on there, the long-form videos of Thriller and Bad and Billie Jean, resurrect that company, or should I say, make it even possible as a fledgling music television channel. Michael Jackson had to beg them to allow him to make them successful and rich. So I think, in summary, the reality is Michael Jackson's humanity is so deep, the implications and inferences of his art so monumentally and magnificently global that nothing American television could do to besmirch his character could ever if you will, deny the legitimate genius that he represents, and America has responded as indeed has the globe.
That raises this question for me, Dr. West, then, when you talk about Michael's legacy, which again, as Dr. Dyson so brilliantly lays out, is more than just number one records, more than just being a fashion icon, more than just the videos that he produced, and it just completely changed the way we do music videos. It's more than just that. It is, to Dyson's point about, if I can put it this way, striking a metaphorical blow against segregation, against white supremacy, against racism, against discrimination. Two questions. Did Michael really do all that? Is that too much for an artist to do? And if it's not too much for an artist to do, what then ought artists today take from his legacy in that regard?
Well, I think, Brother Tavis, that any great artist, it could be Beethoven, wrestling with his nephew who was pushed to suicidal attempt. It could be Dostoevsky with gambling habits. Any great artist is wrestling with their sadness and loneliness, their fears, anxieties, and insecurities, and they're transfiguring those into complicated forms of expression that affect our hearts, minds, and souls and remind us of who we are as human beings, the fragility of our human status and the inevitability of death. Michael Jackson was a great artist who also happened to be the greatest entertainer, not just of his generation, but of the 20th century, with echoes of that, as with Astaire and some other great entertainers. That there's a political dimension to what he did, but it was an indirect effect. First and foremost, he was Catherine and Joseph's child, trying to make sense of the world, given this immense talent, tremendous discipline, and determination to express himself, and most importantly, being true to the calling of getting his work done. So that, yes, he did have those kind of political effects and consequences, but first and foremost, as a great artist who happened to also be a great entertainer, he was able to express himself in such a way that he allowed us to have a sense of what it feels like to be alive. He had a joy in being alive. There was a joy you felt of him on the stage and making us not just feel good, but pushing us against ourselves with the man in the mirror, looking at ourselves critically, black or white. What does it mean to get caught in a color as opposed to a rich history and culture? What does it mean to talk about the future, which may be tomorrow? I mean, we can go on and on with his artistic expression. At the deepest level, he's a human being who made sense of the world at the highest level of excellence, and people will talk about him in the same way they've talked about all the great artists down through the course of his time, I think.
That raises a fascinating question, Dr. Dyson, whether or not Dr. West, in fact, is right about that. One could argue that in many respects, both socially, certainly economically, and even politically, one could argue that Elvis Presley, in some regards, is bigger in death now than he was in life, given the way that we see this story being spun, being told at the moment. Is that possible for Michael Jackson? Put another way, not that he needs to be, but for the purposes of our conversation, to be redeemed, as it were, even in death.
Well, there's no question about it. Your point is brilliant. Elvis Presley died at 42 years old under similar conditions, frighteningly and hauntingly so. And the parallels between Elvis and Michael Jackson as incredible artists is evident. But I think that where Michael Jackson even transcends Elvis Presley emerged on the underside, but within the context of the dominant race in this American society. So that no matter he was a poor, white, working-class human being who expressed the ethos of his time and articulated the sensibilities and possibilities of an America that was indebted to segregation, he appealed to black music, channeled it through his own vocal cords, and therefore exploited the infinite and intimate possibilities of black identity in the midst of a white supremacist culture. Michael Joseph Jackson's genius was the ability to be the raw article himself, the real article himself. He is part of the African-American people who were marginalized. Elvis had a step up. Elvis had a step stool, if you will, to success because he came from the dominant culture. They identified with him. Michael Jackson had to come further and go deeper into the pit of possibility of American democracy and of cultural expression. His music was not seen as an intimate and organic development of American society.